Back in the late 90s, I lived along the Atlantic coastline in a quiet town in Maine. I worked at the local bank about a block away from my house, and I really had to go anywhere that was further than 20 miles away from my driveway. My sister gave birth to a daughter when she was 20 and unmarried, and I offered to watch baby Sarah during the late afternoons on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, while my sister went to her college classes. I had a fairly big house with a nice wide open yard, and even a widow's walk on the roof where I would take Sarah on nice days so she could look out at the ocean. For those of you who don't know, a widow's walk is like a platform or a porch, either on top of or right off of the roof. You can usually find them on those older New England style homes. Sarah was quite the tiny artist and would frequently draw crayon pictures of my house, myself, and my cat Emmett. Once she brought me a picture of her, myself, and Emmett all up on the widow's walk. Our hair was comically being blown about in the wind when I noticed that she had drawn a black creature of some kind at the far end of the walk, hanging over the side with elongated arms. "What's that?" she simply replied with, "The long legs monster." After a few more questions, she explained to me that the long legs monster lived under my house and would crawl around the property at night, even up along the top of the house, to get a better look at us sometimes, and that it really didn't like Emmett. I was amused and intrigued by her tiny imagination, and encouraged her to keep drawing the monster if she kept seeing it, more or less convinced that she was seeing bizarrely shaped shadows and making them into fictional characters for her enjoyment. Over the next several weeks, she made dozens of more drawings, and it seemed like every third or fourth one would also have the monster in them, which confused me because it started to appear more and more often inside the house. When I asked her how it was getting in, she said through the trapdoor in the widow's walk, since I never locked it. Again, I was intrigued with her creativity. It seems she noticed that whenever we came back inside after visiting the widow's walk, I wouldn't bolt the door behind me. What's the point? No one was going to break in up there. In retrospect, I probably should have told her mother about the drawings, but I was so caught up in my own life and adult responsibilities that I didn't think much about them beyond how imaginative they were. I never had children of my own, so I wasn't used to thinking like a parent, only really as an onlooker. Once in the dead of winter, with a foot of snow piled outside the door, Emmett went missing. I searched everywhere in the house, in every possible hiding space, but he was nowhere to be found. Later that week, Sarah came to visit and didn't even ask about my cat, instead drawing a picture by the fireplace of Emmett being chased away through the snow by the long legs monster. I asked her when Emmett would come back, and Sarah laughed and said, "He can't come back, silly." That night I was sitting cross-legged on my bed with my electric heater. It makes a humming noise when turned on, but it's not quite loud enough to drown out the pattering of feet on the widow's walk that I heard above me. I didn't think twice about it, figuring it had to be some squirrels or something like that. That's when I heard a loud thud from the hallway ceiling where the trapdoor was. It sounded like something had lifted the door and immediately dropped it. I walked into the hallway and turned on the lights. I could definitely smell the cold outside air, but the trapdoor was still closed. I was at a loss. The wind could not have lifted it like that, and neither could any squirrels pattering around up there. I bolted it shut. I returned to the bedroom and pulled out Sarah's drawings from my drawer. I examined them carefully, and for the first time, I held them upside down. My stomach sank. When they were held upside down, I could make out the outline of a torso and a head attached to the legs instead of a dark blob. Turning the picture back over, I could better see that it appeared to be a human, doing some kind of crab walk motion, with a head hanging upside down, mouth wide open. I suddenly desperately wanted my cat back. That night I found it very difficult to sleep. I chalked it up to paranoia, but I could not shake the feeling of being watched. The following night I came back inside from shoveling snow and rested my shoes and coat by the fire when I heard the unmistakable sounds of shuffling footsteps from upstairs. I freaked out and I turned on every light in the house, grabbed the dusty stun gun from the kitchen, and shot upstairs, where I noticed one of the picture frames had fallen onto the carpeted floor. As I went to hang it back up, I heard a thump from the trapdoor on the widow's walk. I walked over to it, unbolted it, and then lifted it slowly, the weight of the snow pressing down upon me. Once outside, I took a step towards the railing and immediately saw that there was no one there. Just to be sure, I walked over to the side and peered over the railing briefly, just to check my roof. When I turned back around, I swear by every star in the night sky, there was a frantic mess of footprints in the snow over by the trapdoor that hadn't been there when I had stepped out just moments before. Footprints that looked like handprints. I crawled back inside and slammed the door and locked it again. Aside from my psychiatrist, I have never spoken to anyone about this. I convinced myself that I had missed something or had been dreaming. I'm writing this now because a few nights ago, after about 20 years, I heard the shuffling on my roof again. I tried talking to Sarah about it, but she's in college herself now and doesn't remember anything. When I went to dig out her old pictures from my filing cabinet, none of the pictures of the long-legs monster were there. Absolutely none of them. Only the ones she drew without it were there. Since I've heard the shuffling noise, I haven't unbolted the widow's walk trapdoor. I figure whatever I'm experiencing in that house, or in my head, will pass. So I intend just to suffer through the shuffling noises and the pattering above me at night, and keep my house locked up tight. I had a nightmare a while back that I saw the creature at the foot of my bed, staring at me with its head hanging crookedly upside down, its eyes dark and hungry. I'm sure it was just a nightmare though. It had to be. My name is Dominic, and I live in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, right by the Route 95 bridge that connects us with Maine across the water. Recently on this channel, I heard a story that nearly sent me into shock and brought back horrifying memories from years ago when I encountered something unexplainable. In late August of 2014, I was out flying my remote-controlled drone over an open field, learning how to properly navigate it and taking video of the landscape beneath me. Not for any specific reason other than to get a sense of the camera's range and learn exactly how to operate it. Once it started to get dark, I packed up the drone and drove home. Upon reviewing the footage, I realized that I had captured an animal of some kind on the roof of a nearby barn. I figured that it was just a cat or something, but after examining the image closer, I realized that that couldn't be. The limbs were far too long. That confused me because I couldn't think of an animal that would be lounging in the open on a roof in New Hampshire, whose legs were longer than its torso. It reminded me of a spider in the way it shifted across the roof, but it was obviously far too large to be an insect. The more I zoomed in on the image, the more blurry and unrecognizable it became. I transferred the image on my phone and sent a few screenshots to my friends, asking them to give me an opinion on what it was. Most of them said it was nothing, a shadow, or a hole in the roof. But one friend pointed out to me that it almost looked like a man crouching, with his legs and arms positioned at awkward angles. I replayed the footage probably about 70 times that night. In total, it was only on camera for about 6 seconds, but it felt even shorter, like a blink of an eye. But what really bothered me was that as I was operating the drone, I was standing less than 50 yards away from it, and the idea that another person could have been spying on me chilled me to the bone. A few days went by and I forgot all about it, and got caught up with the responsibilities of day-to-day life. Then one night my Irish Terrier named Ronan wouldn't stop barking. At 10 p.m. he was barking at the west side of the house, but by 11 he had moved to barking at the south side. Just after midnight I finally got fed up with his nearly non-stop racket and went downstairs. He was barking and growling, his paws up against the front door, snarling like someone was on the other side. I flipped on the outside light, but I saw that there was no one on the front porch. I took him down the basement stairs and into our laundry room, where he could bark to his heart's content, without bothering anyone. The very next day, my sister's 5-year-old son, Kyle, who was spending the weekend with me, hung a picture up on the fridge with his SpongeBob magnets. I stopped and took a look at it. It appeared to be a crude picture of a black creature with multiple elongated legs crawling up our driveway. "Hey buddy, what did you draw there?" "The monster that was outside our house last night," he said matter-of-factly, as if he was telling me the color of his shirt. "I didn't know that there was a monster outside last night," I responded with mock surprise. "Ronan kept it away with his barking, but when you brought him downstairs the monster crawled up on the roof. It tried to get in, but it couldn't." Suddenly this didn't seem like just another story from his tiny imagination. "Why'd it try to get in, Kyle?" "You made it angry." "How did I make it angry?" "You took its picture." My mouth literally fell open, and I took another hard look at the drawing. And in a strange way, the black mass did resemble the mysterious shape that I had noticed on the rooftop with my drone recording. That put me on edge, because I hadn't shown the footage to Kyle, or even mentioned it to him or my sister. I questioned Kyle for another few minutes, but he only gave me vague, unhelpful answers like small children do. That night, Ronan kept barking well past 1 a.m., and when I finally got an irritated text from my neighbor complaining about the noise, I finally caved in and brought my dog down into the laundry room again, feeling much more reluctant to do so than I had before. I hadn't even climbed back into bed when I heard the heavy scuttling across my roof, like there was raccoons running back and forth up there. I remember what Kyle had said, and I suddenly was very afraid for the safety of my nephew and myself. Not knowing what else to do, I opened my laptop and deleted all the drone footage in a panic and erased all the photos from my phone. About 5 minutes later, the scuttling sound stopped. Feeling relieved and somewhat foolish, I headed to bed and slept restlessly through the night. The following day, I was approached by my neighbor, who lived across the street. She handed me a drawing her daughter had made at daycare, and asked why her daughter was so insistent that there was a monster watching her from our roof every night. I unfolded the picture, and lo and behold, the child's drawing featured the girl and her mother across the street from my house, where a black creature sat on my roof, staring them down hungrily. I was kind of taken aback by the woman's attitude, and was irritated at her implication that I had something to do with frightening her daughter. I told her that I had no idea what her daughter was having nightmares about, and that a Crayola marker picture wasn't proof of any kind. She gave me a sour look and marched across the street, without taking her picture back. Kyle went home that night, and for the next week, Ronan didn't do any barking, and I didn't hear any noise from the roof. Convinced that whatever was happening was over, I took my drone out again, and flew it over the local skate park to capture some footage of the skateboarders, before turning the drone around to have it check the local farmer's market. I flew the drone for a few more hours, and then headed to the skate park to smoke a cigarette. I stayed until the sun started to set, and the farmer's market was fully packed up. I was the last one out of the skate park, because I was talking to my sister on my cell phone about Kyle, and she was asking me why he kept drawing black monsters hiding at the foot of my bed. My mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" "He keeps drawing pictures of a man he says is you sleeping, while a giant spider monster of some kind watches you from across the room." I froze in horror, immediately feeling exposed and vulnerable, and quickly stood up to collect my things. I told my sister I had to go, and hung up the phone. As I slung my knapsack over my shoulder, I thought I heard something behind me. I turned around and saw a dark shape emerge, one elongated leg at a time from behind the skateboard ramp. I only caught a glimpse of it in the dark, because in the next moment, I was sprinting out of there. I ran the long way out of the park, and around the strip mall to put as much distance between myself and it. As soon as I stopped running, the logical side of my brain started berating me. I had definitely just seen a seagull or something spreading its wings as it got ready to take flight. There was no such thing as monsters, and a few kid drawings and a mysterious shape on my drone footage wasn't proof of anything, and it wasn't going to get me to start running from shadows. I made myself walk casually to the parking garage where I left my car. I was halfway across the lot when I noticed a man in a dark hoodie heading in the same direction I was going. I nodded to him and held open the elevator door so we could both ride up together. I was trying to make myself behave casually and normal again, and stop acting so paranoid. Still ashamed at myself for tearing out of the skate park like a frightened cat. The man in the hoodie didn't say anything to me as he got in. He kept his head down, so I could barely make out his face as the elevator doors closed. He was extremely tall, and had at least a good foot on me. He wore a black hoodie and dark slacks of some kind. As the elevator doors opened, I walked past him and into the garage. I walked maybe 5 steps when I heard my name whispered behind me. Dominic. I turned around, figuring the man in the hoodie was someone I knew that I hadn't recognized. What I'm about to tell you is going to make you all convinced that I'm a liar or insane, and that's my peril, I guess. But I swear on my mother's beating heart, this is exactly what happened. The man in the hoodie bent over backwards like a gymnast, his legs bent, knees pointed upwards, elbows sticking out crookedly as his arms caught the weight of his upper body. The light in the elevator went out right as the man's head spun around with a loud cracking sound. He maneuvered his body around, hands and feet pressing against the elevator wall, its massive bulk suddenly too large for the small space. The light in the elevator flashed on and off like a strobe light, illuminating a completely black hairy mass, held up by 4 extremely long crooked limbs. The moment before the elevator doors closed, 2 piercing red eyes stared directly at me, from the mangled head hanging underneath the bulk of the body. The door shut. I dropped my backpack and my suitcase with the drone, and I ran. Right before I turned the key in the ignition of my car, I heard the elevator doors open again, but I didn't turn my head to see what had emerged. I drove home, grabbed Ronin, and checked myself into a motel in Vermont for 6 days. When I returned home, I couldn't find any of Kyle's pictures. The only one I still had was the drawing my neighbor's child had made, and I think that was the only one that remained, because I dropped it in the trash in my garage. I installed a security system in my house and set up motion sensor cameras. A few years have passed, and right when I think I'm in the clear, I heard a story on this channel describing the exact same creature I saw in the elevator. I'm not sure if it's the same creature, but it's too similar to be a coincidence. The woman in Maine who claimed to see it, watching her from the end of her bed, referred to it as the Long Legs Monster. One day I was putting up a fence with my father to make an enclosure for some new animals that we had on the farm. After a while, my dad and I separated and were working on opposite ends of the fence. Even though he still was within shouting distance, I began to feel uneasy. For some reason, I began looking over my shoulder towards the woods every few moments, a soft warning voice in my head alerting me that I wasn't safe, that something was out there, watching. It didn't help that the sun was setting, and I was only getting closer to the tree line as I worked on the fence. I made myself concentrate on the task at hand, but it was like trying to ignore a scorpion that was crawling around on the back of your neck. I think deep down humans have this animalistic sense that warns us whenever something dangerous is watching us, that views us as prey. We just don't experience it often, because there aren't many animals hunting us from our designated spot at the top of the food chain. I decided to take a break and stretch my legs. I wandered over to the chicken coop to see if the chickens were acting panicked in any way. But when I got there, my heart skipped a beat. In retrospect, I should have known something was wrong, because the chickens had gone quiet for a while. All of our chickens were lying in bloody heaps around the coop. I called for my dad, who ran over and began cursing up a storm. We both couldn't understand it. They were not torn apart as if an animal had gotten to them. It was like something had punctured them and then drained their blood. My dad picked up one of the dead bodies and indicated that none of the bones were broken. The neck, wings, and legs were still all intact. Confused and furious, my dad decided to call it a night. We would abandon the fence until the next day, and my dad set up trail cameras all around the perimeter of our property, determined to find out what kind of animal attacked our chickens. Later on that night, I was playing video games in my room, which is on the second floor of our house. It was pitch black outside, and I was invested in my game, having shaken off that terrible feeling of dread from earlier when I was outside. It was just after midnight when the feeling returned, And this time it was even worse. I shut off my game and froze in the center of my room in complete darkness, other than the faint glow of the blank TV screen. Suddenly I saw reflected against the screen something crawling past my window. Something huge. I bolted downstairs and locked myself in the laundry room, where there was a cot and no windows. I didn't want to wake my parents because I was sure that they would never believe me. Still, I suppose it was a dick thing to do, just leaving them up there after having seen something crawling around our house. The following day, my dad was going through our trail camera pictures. There was a set of pale eyes staring directly into the lens. The eyes didn't look quite human, but we couldn't figure out exactly what kind of animal it could be. We had seen countless deer in trail cam photos before, and their eyes never unnerved us the way these were. It was as if the animal wasn't only aware of the camera, but knew what it was for, and that we would be checking it later. We stared at the eyes for more than 10 minutes, trying our best to hold it together. We never got around to working on the fence that day. That night we locked all the deadbolts, and my dad kept a shotgun ready by the door. We sat up for a while in the living room, just talking and trying to put our minds at ease. At about 11 p.m. we began to hear a scuttling sound coming from our roof. After about 20 minutes of this, my dad told us to stay put, and he grabbed his gun and walked out into the yard. We didn't hear any shots, but after less than a minute, my dad was back inside, bolting the door behind him. He said, "Delete the picture," in a breathless voice. When we asked him why, he just shook his head in confusion and terror and whispered, "It told me to." We couldn't get anything else out of him that night. The following day, he described it as a spider-like creature that had him dead to rights, but had let him go. My dad took down all the trail cams, and we tried our best just to get on with our lives. That's all any of us can really do. I've puzzled over what the thing could have been for years, and we never finished putting up the fence. What's the point? It would have never kept that thing out. After hearing some stories online, I'm convinced it was the creature they call the Long Legs Monster. I'm an on-again, off-again videographer for various film studios in Hollywood. I've done some work for network crime dramas, but my longest-running job was on the TV series Entourage. In my spare time, I shoot a lot of crazy footage like extreme skateboarding, freestyle rock climbing, and back alley street fighting. Stuff that normally requires for people to sign a form saying that they won't sue me if they end up breaking their neck. Some of my stuff I sell as footage for music videos or commercials, but most of it I sell to the networks and film studios, and the footage usually ends up in cutaway moments between scene transitions and shit like that. Back in 2003, me and a friend of mine named Troy were out in the woods somewhere in rural Virginia. We were shooting some footage of us firing arrows through a rusty chain link fence. I had brought my Norwegian girlfriend along with us, who ended up doing most of the shooting. Her name was Grissom. My buddy Troy would retrieve the arrows, bring them back, and plant them in the dirt point down, and Grissom would pick them up and fire them back at the fence. I was smoking and pointing the camera from multiple angles. Troy had just planted 4 more arrows in the dirt next to Grissom when he snatched his hand back like a rat had locked onto his finger.
"What the hell, man? I just felt something move onto my hand."
Grissom drew another arrow from the ground and immediately held it out at arm's length in disgust. It was covered in daddy long legs spiders. I zoomed in with my camera and discovered that the arrow was swarming with about 15 or so of those spiders. She dropped the arrow in the dirt and picked up another one. This arrow had less, probably about 4, but the fact that there were so many shocked me.
Jesus Christ, they're everywhere. I think I'm gonna be sick, dude. I hate spiders.
Grissom asked him where he picked up the arrows. Troy pointed back to the other side of the fence.
"Back beyond the fence there."
The 3 of us headed back down the fence the long way, me still pointing the camera, and walked into the shade of 2 large trees leaning against one another. We kicked some leaves underfoot, and noticed literally hundreds of long-legged spiders scampering around like crazy. Grissom pointed out there were hundreds more swarming up and down the trees.
What could be drawing them all together like that?
Troy backed away out of the shade, not wanting to get any closer. I kept zooming in and filming the spiders, literally crawling over each other in a frenzy. We kept shifting our feet and brushing at our ankles so none of the roaming spiders would climb up our legs. I filmed for maybe 2 or 3 more minutes, figuring that I would use the footage for some kind of horror movie. Eight-Legged Freaks had just come out, and all I could think of was contacting a buddy of mine at Warner Brothers as soon as I got back. Troy walked away to a safer distance and called out to me.
Dude, I'm through. I'm heading back.
I did a perimeter sweep of my camera one last time, before calling back to him that I was on my way. That's when I noticed a line of them, traveling almost single file like an ant colony, heading deeper into the forest, right out in the open where they could easily be stepped on. I followed the trail with my camera, unable to resist the temptation and see where the trail was heading.
Dude, no. It's going to lead to some rotting deer carcass or something. We're going to leave you behind.
I ignored him and kept zooming in on the orderly line of spiders, convincing myself that this must be how spiders always act, and that I was too much of an ignorant loser to have learned about it. As I raised the camera back to eye level, I noticed the marching insects heading towards the base of a nearby tree. Positioned at the bottom of the tree was a crouched figure in a dark coat, with his hood pulled low over his face. I cursed and leapt back, startled at the sight of another human being so close by. I was about to say something when I noticed the parade of spiders were literally, hand to God, traveling into this person's open hand, and they were silently slithering up his arm under his coat sleeve. As strange as it seems, I remember cracking a huge grin, figuring that this must be some kind of prank or Chris Angel type trick. Suddenly this man's head shot towards me, his face still obscured by his hood. He then shot up silently like a spring-loaded trap. I spun around and saw Grissom standing behind me. She had a look of fear in her eyes. I then turned back to the figure. Troy then shouted from somewhere behind us,
Run!
The figure began to thrash wildly. Its upper body made a 90-degree turn to face us, while its legs remained in the opposite direction. No normal human being on this earth, no matter how flexible, could have contorted their body like that, without completely snapping their spine. The figure then arced its legs backwards, while its feet turned towards us. All while this was happening, its limbs stretched out to more than double their length. I had no idea what I was looking at. It was like seeing something from a nightmare cross the threshold into reality. The abomination then let out an ear-piercing wail. It then began to crawl towards us, like a spider closing in on a trapped fly. The camera slipped out of my hands before I started to run back through the trees towards the road. By the time we made it to the car, we figured that we were safe. There was no sign of the figure pursuing us. While Grissom and Troy leapt into the car, I was standing there dumbfounded, too shocked to move. While Troy started the car, Grissom grabbed me hard by the shirt collar and pulled me into the back seat. As the car started to move, Troy called out from the front,
What is that thing behind us?
We turned to catch a glimpse of a dark, long-legged figure scuttling between the trees. Through the rear window, we watched it disappear into the shadows. As quickly as it vanished, so did our certainty that we had seen it in the first place. As soon as it was gone, we immediately started doubting ourselves, and tried to rationalize on what it could have been, even though deep down, we all knew what we saw, and we just didn't want to admit it. Grissom never spoke about the thing we saw in the woods after that day, and Troy and I rarely talk about it. It's weird. It's like we feel guilty or something. Like we buried a body out there and promised to take the secret to our graves. How do you tell somebody about that without proof? The sun was setting, and Troy and I were at least a little tipsy. No one would ever believe us, so why even bother trying to make someone else take you seriously? After hearing a few accounts online, I think it's the thing the internet is calling the long legs monster. I'm not sure if we took it by surprise, like it was sleeping or something, but it never stalked us the way the other accounts have reported it doing. We never went back to that spot, and I doubt that I could find it even if I looked for it. No footage from that day has ever surfaced online. Whatever you do, make sure you watch out for spiders.
There's always a reason to be afraid.